It's time for Booting Up, where we learn from untraditional techies on how they succeeded in their early careers. And today's guest, we are talking with someone that went from bootcamp to engineering manager in just 3 years, which is honestly insane. And now he's actually made a switch to go from engineering manager back to individual contributor. So we'll find out why. But before we get into it and bring him on, just if it's your first time here and you want to make sure you find us again, make sure to subscribe below. And if you learned something new today, leave a like. That way other people trying to break into tech can find this knowledge that he's about to drop and learn something new from it too. So without further delay, let's bring on Vivek.
Hey,
Vivek, what's
Rob.
up, man?
Not too much. Just enjoying my Wednesday here.
Yeah, I know hump day is always my favorite day, honestly, because I get to talk
Exactly.
to cool people like you and learn something since I do not know much.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. It's my first podcast, so I'm really excited.
Yeah, no pressure then. So let's start where our stories actually like kind of line up because you went to UF, I went to UF,
Yep.
and you studied electrical engineering. I did for 3 years, but I actually did not finish it up. So I respect you for finishing it. But what was the initial plan? When you started electrical engineering?
Oh man. It was a few things. I think it kind of naturally fell to me. I grew up, using electronics, playing video games, just, always was like tinkering with different, pieces of hardware and everything. And, I was always good at math and science. So it was like, hey, that's just like a perfect major for me in a lot of ways, right? So it started off as an EE and like you're saying, just kind of went through the whole 4 years and it wasn't easy to your point. I definitely had a lot of late nights at the library, but no, the plan there was really just, get a reputable degree. Everyone I've talked to and all my mentors and family growing up always said, you're never going to go wrong with an engineering degree. So that was a big reason for it to happen. And again, it just really felt like a good match based on, what I was interested in and good at in school as well. And I, initially going into it, I always thought I would maybe work and build some cool hardware product and be, making maybe the next iPhone or something like that. But, kind of funny how life works, and it took me down a different path altogether.
Yeah, I know. Like I went to it because I was like, okay, nanotechnology is cool. Like electrical engineering has to do with that. Like I'm gonna go into it and do that. But I think it was the geologic class that got me.
Oh, that was a good one. I
That
definitely
class.
remember. Yeah. That was I think that was my junior year. I took that one. I remember.
That's a brutal. I still have nightmares about it. But so you come out of electrical engineering, you finish that up, and instead of going into the hard tech route, you went into sales. So was that by design, or is it just like you got the right opportunity, so you went that route?
Yeah. So that was really interesting, actually. I was in my senior year. I was in spring of semester, and I just didn't really know what what kind of role I wanted, or if I wanted to stay hardcore engineering or do something a little bit more hybrid. And I actually had a sales engineering minor at UF, so I was always interested in the business side, and I actually did get a business administration minor as well. So I always wanted to mix something with business and technical ability. So long story short, a good friend of mine who I used to study with for our EE classes, he ended up getting a role at Texas Instruments as a sales engineer, or technical sales, sales rep, I should say. But he reached out and was like, hey, there's a rep in town. He went to UF. He's recruiting here. I think it'd be great for us to go meet up and, just get to talk to him and see if it's something you're interested in. And lo and behold, we met at the bar that night. He told me a little bit more about the role and what it entails and what it means to be a technical salesman. And it just kind of hit all my check marks, right? It was you're not sitting in a dark room all day, just tinkering with circuits, and that's kind of the weird kind of perception I had of what like a real engineer does.
I had the same perception, so I feel you.
Yeah, and so I was like, I like talking to people. I really enjoy, meeting folks and introducing myself and getting to know people. And so sales engineering just seemed like a perfect, combo of my, personality as well as, again, my technical abilities. So, I got very lucky and ended up getting that job, and that kind of took me down the sales path, actually.
It's interesting because I feel like anyone going into engineering usually like you said, like you're a tinkerer, you like to like mess with things and get kind of deep into a problem. So like sales is like the opposite. Like I was scared of sales roles like coming out of college. So So was it kind of like out of your comfort zone, or you're like, hey, like I'm ready to talk to people and get some stuff done?
It kind of was natural, to be honest, right? I mean, Florida's a big school. I got to meet a lot of people, get to, brush shoulders with a lot of folks from different, backgrounds and interests. And I think that carried itself really well into sales, actually, right? Where, you're meeting all sorts of people, working with different functions and departments, working with engineers, working with operations and supply chain people, working with finance and different operations folks. I think it was really a natural kind of shift there, and it didn't really scare me, but I will say there was, in my first year, you get a little intimidated, especially, we would be in rooms with C-level executives, and we'd be, meeting with some of the big, top people at the company, and you want to always make sure you're presenting yourself well. So I think that's what probably scared me the most, and I wanted to make sure, I always presented myself well and had good questions to ask in those calls. But the scariest thing, to be honest, was cold calling. And so I used to actually go into a lot of startups in San Francisco when I first started, and would just knock on these garage doors or these random condo units and
knock on garage doors.
Oh yeah, I would just go
beyond cold calling.
Oh yeah, I would do some homework on TechCrunch. I would look on all the different Crunchbase and different funding websites, see who was raising money, and then try to find an address. And then if I was in the area for a different call, I'd just make a little stop and peek in and see if the people were there. And I would just kind of say, hey, it's Vivek from TI. I saw you guys were looking at some parts. Can I interest you in anything, or is there anything you guys need from me right now? Here's my business card, and just drop it off, right? And it was definitely nerve-wracking at first, but after you get over it for the first few times, it's a breeze. You're just like, hey, I'm here if you need help. I'm always available. But I would say that was the hardest part, if anything.
No, it's a good point, because with sales, it's kind of like with going for job interviews, where you're going to get no's, and you got to get used to those no's and just bounce back, learn from them. But if you don't try, you're not going to get anything out of it. If you don't ask, you don't get.
Exactly. And I remember there's a quote. It's like, it takes 7 no's to get a yes, or something like that, right? So you got to be persistent. Yeah. I think there's some science behind it, actually. But yeah, it takes 7 no's for a yes, and I kind of kept that in mind all the time in my sales role.
All right. I think it depends situation. Sometimes takes 100, sometimes takes 3. But I'll
definitely true.
So how long were you doing the sales for?
Right under 4 years. So
4 years,
decent amount of time. Yeah.
So when did it become like, hey, I want to get out of this? Was there something that triggered it, or was it natural progression?
Definitely. So it was a mix of a couple factors, actually. So number one was, again, I was selling to a lot of new and emerging business in San Francisco and the Bay Area. And so, again, mainly startups and people that had just started getting traction. And so after meeting with all these folks, and everybody I was talking to was 3 to 5 years out minimum, right? So I was seeing the kind of early stages of products you may see years later in Best Buy or on Amazon, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was just blown away, and I just meeting all these really bright people and just really folks that wanted to change the world and wanted to build the next best product. I think that really inspired me, and I kind of felt like, hey, Texas Instruments was great. I learned a lot. It was a big company, great first role, but I wanted to get into a startup. Right. And so I wanted to be on the other end of the sales table, is what I realized more and more. And so that kind of led me down a path to start interviewing, frankly. And so I was looking for, software roles and sales engineering in particular. But what I noticed was I was a little rusty with code. So, when it got to that portion of the interview, I wasn't performing as well. And I also had a lot of hesitation from different companies, because they were like, oh, hey, you're a hardware sales guy. You know, software is a whole different game. It's not the same. But I kind of took that to heart to a degree, and I was like, well, I'm an engineer, right? I can code if you need me to. So I kind of took it as a challenge in one way. And I think there's another factor where, as a sales guy, I saw myself getting more and more away from the technical side, and that's not necessarily a bad thing in a lot of ways, right? Different skills have different merits, and For me personally, though, I felt that that was not going to be good for my long-term career. And I felt that the more technical I am, the more sticky I am, and the more sticky in the sense of like, obviously you're probably not the first on the chopping block if a company has to do any budget cuts or anything. But sales is a very, what have you done for me lately kind of job, right? It's like
quotas, yeah.
Every month is a new day, right? So even if you're doing really well, you could have some things happen that are outside of your control. And I didn't like that feeling, right? Where it's like my success to a degree was dictated by things I couldn't influence. Engineering kind of was the complete opposite. Everything I do is either a 1 or 0, a yes or no, or it works or it doesn't, right? And so that really appealed to me, I would say.
No, it's so true. Like, and that's one thing I like about code. I think I was like posting about it the other day, where like when I work on like design or like writing stuff, I never know when I'm done there. Both code, like it works. Like it works. Like you can do some optimization, but like there's an answer to everything. So that's like the most like satisfying about it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I always remember that when I was first starting, it was like, do you get that sense of like when you get a function working or a program working, do you get that like, oh, all right, like that aha moment? And I did, right? And I every time I would get something working or I would learn something, I had that sense of satisfaction. And I think that's what kind of told me, hey, this is something you can do full time and maybe pivot into.
Yeah, when you recognize a strength, like and you enjoy it, then like why not go into it?
Exactly.
Also, I think it was like a big thing, like you mentioned before, is also like you were surrounded by these startup people. So that's why I think also the people you're hanging out with, like they always say like you're the product of like the 4 people you chill with the most. And I think that's like one thing that people should be changing when they're entering tech is surrounding themselves by more tech people. Otherwise, you're not going to grow as fast.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really resonate with that actually. And that's something I really have tried to do in my career and in my personal life also is really, make sure that my close circle are people that, are intelligent, but also are driven. Right. And I think surrounding yourself with those kinds of people really inspire you and it makes you have a bar to hit. Right. So when you see other people hitting that bar, it's attainable and you have a rubric for it.
100%. So when you decide like, hey, I'm going to go into tech, I know the coding classes in college, I think I did like Java when I was in the engineering program. So not as relevant for web dev. So how do you decide like how you're going to go into web dev specifically?
Yeah. So I did to your point, a lot of C programming in college, and that I actually, I really enjoyed it back then. And one of probably my biggest regrets of college was not switching majors from EE to CS actually. And there's a whole other story there why I didn't, but basically I would say that the CS the CS path. I'm so sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was the question again?
Basically, like how do you decide like the route you're going to take to get to learn web development and break into that industry?
Right. So like I was saying, I had the C experience, but what I noticed was that a lot of the internet startups and a lot of the companies were all built on the web and frankly mobile and iOS and Android at the time, right? And mobile apps were like, the hottest thing. Everybody was building an app back in like 2012, 2013. And so I felt that, hey, that's the space I want to get into. And I want to, work for these startups, and all of them were using JavaScript. They were using Python or, all these web languages that, I didn't really have a lot of exposure to from college. But I will say that it does help a lot to have that low level understanding before touching these web languages, because you really understand what's going on under the hood, right? I think one thing I noticed when I was doing the web development, ramping up was a lot of stuff is abstracted away, and it kind of is handled for you in terms of like memory management and interrupts and different timers and very, very complicated and complex interactions on the low level computer what do you call it,
interface
level, I guess, but interface. Yeah. And so I would say that it was really good that I had that exposure, because it helped me pick up the web languages better, and also not just, write it and kind of assume I know. I actually did understand to a degree, like what's happening at the register level or what's happening at the very, very, minute scale.
Yeah. So it's like, Yeah, I say with coding, like once you learn one language, you kind of can just transfer to anyone pretty easily. But in
Mhm.
your case, I guess like you're going like a level deeper because you understand like the circuitry and like the actual logic behind it. So that help you like
Exactly.
kind of like right. I guess kind of like, not to skip too far ahead, but is your code really optimized now based off of that knowledge?
I like to think so. But it definitely helps you, if you have two options, it helps you make that distinction of which is the better one, right? And you can kind of plan around that as well. But yeah, I don't think it's doing anyone any harm to know those languages and to start off with those to a degree. But again, if you're going into web, that it may be overkill, but never a bad thing to learn.
Gotcha. So you went into Hack Reactor, right? It was Hack Reactor.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what made you like go into that program specifically, and then what was your experience like in boot camp?
Yeah, so I remember at the time, like when I was debating about making the pivot, I was doing a lot of homework about how to break into software and how to make this career change. And obviously, one option was getting a master's degree and going back to school.
Expensive.
Another option, very expensive and time consuming, right? I
Yeah,
was already in the Bay making money. I didn't want to, there's an opportunity cost at play, right? So
yeah. So it's like
for
the time is the biggest expense.
absolutely, your time is the most valuable asset, right? So 2 years was going to be a pretty big shift, and again, I did already have that experience and that base level understanding from college, right? And so these boot camps are starting to become a thing around that time, right? And they
Mhm.
started getting more popularity, and I started seeing ads for them when I was like doing my research and when I was studying. And Hack Reactor was the one that constantly popped up. And I mean, I think they did really good SEO was one big thing, but it had some pretty good marketing claims, right? And they were saying, hey, in 3 months plus, we'll make you a software engineer and we'll get you a six-figure salary coming out of it. And so to me, I was like,
Sounds
hey,
nice.
it sounds great to me, right? Like that seems like a pretty reasonable pivot, and it saves me about a year and a half, a little bit more than that of time and energy, right? And obviously money
Mhm.
too. So didn't want to take on more student loans or any debt, so it just kind of felt like, hey, let's try this out. I talked to some folks that went through the program. Everybody had really good, really good reviews, and people were getting placed at top companies. So it just seemed like the right call. And I also remember too when I was applying, because you had to interview and get into the program. It was
Yeah.
not easy, right? Like it was a pretty high bar to even get accepted into the program. And I think that's what really kind of won me over, was like, okay, this is not like anybody can just decide to pick this up and get in. You have to put in the time, and there's a lot of prep work even to get accepted into the program. So that to me meant like, okay, the people here, they know what they're doing, number one, but everyone here is motivated and they want to be here, right? I think that was a big kind of thing for me.
Yeah, and I guess it gets you kind of locked in earlier because you're making an early investment. You're like, all right, I got to do this. Like, make it a little bit hard. So once you do get in, you're like, all right, like now I'm in. Like I can't waste it.
Exactly. And that's what I kind of picked up from everybody there. It was like in college, you had folks that were just like, hey, let me just get through these classes. I don't even know if this is the major I want to be in. And
Yeah,
there's that kind of, that kind of scale of folks across the board. But at Hack Reactor and talking to the folks at other boot camps, everyone's motivated, everyone's hungry, everyone's put a lot of time, and they're changing their career, right? So there's a lot on the line for it. And so I didn't take it as a joke. I was there, every day I had to be, an hour before it opened, hours after it closed. Like I took this really seriously, right? And
it's like Kobe in the gym.
again, that's exactly right. And yeah, you gotta, and there's no substitute for hard work, right? When it comes to, it's a great analogy, and you have to practice your free throws, right? So that's exactly what it was. And I'm really happy I had that attitude, because I think that's what really propelled me coming out. And it's not even that you're spending those 13 weeks doing this kind of effort. Once you get on the job, it's the same thing, right? So I
Exactly.
think it's such a natural progression to get in that mentality and to get into that sort of high energy, high delivery, and hunger that you need to take with you even after graduating. I think it really set me up to come out swinging in the first job.
Yeah, like you said, it's that muscle memory. Like you have to get used to putting in that work every day, busting your ass, failing, not knowing stuff, asking questions, and because that's
Totally.
the entire career in tech is there's always something new, and if you don't ask questions and fail, like it's not gonna work.
Exactly. Yeah, I totally resonate with that. And yeah, like I said, there were people that would leave early, or people that would, kind of just, I didn't finish this assignment, and it was kind of interesting to me because you're only hurting yourself, right? It's like at the end of the day, it's like you're here to learn, so take the time, take the energy. Exactly too. So it was really interesting. But again, those were maybe the exception to the rule. For everyone I had met, and the folks in my cohort were all really bright and really motivated people.
Nah, for sure. Like that's why I see it from bootcamp grads. Like going out into the job search, obviously you still have the same mindset. I know you're busting your ass, but how was it like going out, getting your first job? Like what were your emotions and what was your process?
I'm going to be completely honest. That first job was very difficult to land, right? And I think what I realized was, coming out, I guess I thought my sales skills would have more of an impact or give me that leg up in terms of getting that first job compared to folks that maybe didn't, came from a totally different industry like law or from finance, or folks that maybe were not even graduating college. We had a whole bunch of different backgrounds in the program, right? So I guess I was a little naive, and I thought it would be a little bit easier for me because I had a tech background, I had sales experience, and I've been in the industry. But I got in for a rude awakening once I got out. And what I realized is you're competing with everybody for these junior positions, right? You're competing with bootcamp grads, competing with university grads, you're competing with international people, you're competing with the world essentially, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got to stand out, and you've got to really, come up with your differentiating kind of abilities and assets, and put those out in front of folks, right? And so it was really interesting because I would get on calls with recruiters or with whoever, and they're like, oh, you're pretty well spoken compared to engineers, and that would get my foot in the door, and it would help me land the interviews. But I noticed I was kind of having a tough time in the interviews too. And it was, again, maybe a lack of the fundamentals and this computer science that, again, there's no substitute for putting the time in the gym. And 3 months is a lot, but it's not enough, right? People have 4-year degrees, and there's a reason. So you've got to kind of figure out what is that gap that you're missing when you get out of the program, and what skills do you need to double down on, right? So to your question of, what was my plan? I number one, knew I wanted to work at a startup. I didn't want to work at a big company. I had already come from one. And so that was number one. And so my advice there is to start narrowing down your funnel, right? And you want to cast a wide net, but you also want to kind of have a vision of where you want to be. And one thing I did was also look at job descriptions, look at the requirements, look at the roles and the actual day-to-day duties that this role will do, and figure out, okay, maybe I can definitely do the first 4 bullets, but these last 3 I don't have experience in. And you'll often find that there's certain technologies or certain languages that are more common than others. And so it's good to be familiar with them. But again, I wouldn't say to folks, go learn the nitty gritty of Go, or you don't have to be an expert in Python to land a job. You need to know the concepts and the fundamentals that apply to any language. But I would say narrowing down the scope was a big thing I did, and knowing, again, that I wanted to work in startups. And then again, understanding where my gaps were in my skill set. And I think coming out, I was a little weaker in the algorithms and data structures. And so I really put in a lot of time right after graduating into doing leak code problems, doing, all sorts of, mock interviews, and practicing whiteboarding, and really just trying to time box myself, and making sure that when I got to the interview, I was prepared. And, you don't have that nervousness, or that, oh my gosh, they asked me a question I didn't know, right? Practice is the only substitute to beat that.
Yeah. So a few things I want to unpack there. So one, I agree with what you just said, where like the preparation, that's going to give you the confidence, and that's how you perform. Like I was doing a pitch meeting today, like a sales call, and I did an hour of prep versus like previously I did 10 minutes of prep, and completely different today versus other meetings. And it's the same thing for interviews. Like if you can bring up like a stat or something you found out about the company because you did that extra research, the manager's going to be impressed. So that's good. And then also like you said, focusing on specifically like what do you want? Because if you cast the widest net, there's going to be holes in it and your application just kind of get out. But if you target a small area, then you end up in a better situation and have higher chance of success.
Absolutely. And one thing I forgot to point out was one trick I would say is have multiple resumes, right? I think one size fits all resume is a mistake, actually. And you want to tailor, because I and this also funny, and now that I'm looking back, is I wasn't sure if I wanted, again, even coming out of the boot camp, did I want to do sales engineering as software, or did I want to, do full-time coding? And eventually, obviously, shifted back to the full-time coding.
Yeah.
But I would say that having those resumes fine-tuned to both maybe the company, depending on how much I wanted to be in that company, or to that role, made a big difference in terms of getting those initial responses. Because obviously, if you're a back-end engineer, you don't want to be talking about how much CSS and different front-end frameworks and so on, and vice versa, right? So you really want to make sure that if you're gunning for a back-end role, tailor your resume to be more back-end heavy and focus on the back-end projects, or vice versa. If you're going to front-end, do the same for that.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, because like I know I heard this when I was job searching, like make different resumes, and I was like lazy, like I didn't do it. But like you said, like businesses are looking for someone specific. They're not looking for full stack generalist. They're looking for front-end developer that likes to work on accessibility, something specific, and having that in your resume, telling that story, like you could control the narrative with this piece of paper. So you got to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting, Rod, because I agree with you, definitely. I will say there's a caveat when it comes to startups. Obviously, you need to be very good at one thing, but I think one thing that really appealed to me personally about startups is I can help from multiple angles, right? Yeah. And so I think for folks that are more jack of all trades, or they have experience with different, departments, I think startups are a great fit, and you get to kind of touch a little bit of everything, right? Like, yes, maybe my role is an engineer, and I need to code and I need to build features, fix bugs, so on. But that doesn't stop me from getting on customer calls. That doesn't stop me from helping alleviate customer issues. Doesn't stop me from, helping sales get on calls. Doesn't stop me from, talking to marketing folks. Those are artificial boundaries, right? And I think the more you're able to kind of break those different, department walls down, the more valuable and the better the output's going to be in a lot of ways. So I think I heard multiple takes on this, and I see pros and cons to both. But as I've gotten more in my career, I think I have been starting to get a little bit more deeper than wider, if that makes sense. So I do see the point of having that kind of expertise as well.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, because like usually I recommend people like bootcamp grads to aim for bigger companies where they have time to learn and fail. But going to like the strength of bootcamp grads, it's you're usually coming from a different field. So in a startup, you can leverage that in a better way. Like you said, like you were on sales calls while you're coding, and talking to customers informs like how you build the product. So I think that's brilliant. I never thought about that. Yeah,
and it frankly speaking, it just helps shake your day up, right? I mean, you're not doing the same thing every day if you kind of make it that way, right? So today was pretty much coding all day. Last week I had to get on a customer call, and so it's just like you're kind of all over the place. And for me personally, I like that. It kind of makes every day kind of fun in that regard. Yeah, no, I think it's called the T-shaped. That's what you want for startups. Like deep expertise in one thing, but like knowledgeable in a bunch of things. Exactly. No, that I've heard that phrase before too. That's exactly right. Yeah. So coming out, how long was your job search in total, like with all this knowledge? Oh man. So let's see. I graduated like in June, and I got my first role in August. So it took me about a little under 2 months, I would say. Okay. That's pretty fast in bootcamp terms, I'll tell you that. I will admit, I think I got lucky. Timing is everything, right? And I think I was still at that inflection point in 2014, 2015, where boot camps were around, but they still weren't. There wasn't a whole bunch of them, and there was still not like thousands. There was maybe hundreds of folks that were graduating every 6, 7 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it was a mix of luck to a degree. So I got out of the program at the right time. People were hiring, and there was a lot of needs for junior engineers in that time, right? Not that there isn't today, but I think you just have more competition now, to be frank, right? And you do see it with university students too. Universities are harder to get into also, right? So it's just kind of the way of the world in one sense. But I think to your question, it took me a little under 2 months, and I was primarily hunting on AngelList, right? Because again, I wanted to do startups. Yeah, so I was kind of restricting my search to them, and I believe TripleByte had just came out right around then, so I was using them, and Hired as well. Both good resources. I think those are like for software engineers, those were like kind of the big ones at the time. And so, I ended up getting reached out to by a couple of startups, and ended up at Avenue as a contractor for my first role.
So they actually reached out to you. You weren't applying?
So I made a profile, and then they happened to actually reach out. I did definitely apply to a bunch through the platform, but I think when you make a profile as well, they get access to a pool of candidates. So I think, that was, again, very lucky for me in one way.
Yeah. And just to reiterate for any of the audience, AngelList, it's specifically for startups. And yeah, if you want to work at startups, like that's actually a great site. I've done some recruiting on there before, and it's really like that's where startups like to recruit, because they know people want to go that route. So, if you spend some time off of LinkedIn, go there. But speaking to your contract, so you got this contract, and how long was it for?
It was a little under 3 months in that ballpark.
Okay. And, so this is like your first time, getting paid to do some web dev role. What were the emotions for that?
Yeah, it was a lot of new stuff and new territory for me, right? And I think that's the one thing that I found the most challenging was, JavaScript was my main language, and mean stack was which is MongoDB, Express, Node, and Angular, was the kind of bread and butter for all the projects I did at Hack Reactor. So I had a lot of experience around that stack, but I got to Avenue, and then it was an Angular front end, but it was a Ruby on Rails back end. So it was totally foreign to me at the time, and I was a little overwhelmed at the beginning, because while the front end I was still I wasn't an expert, but I could kind of pick it up a little bit. The back end was kind of like, oh boy, here we go again, right? And I had to kind of start from scratch with Ruby, and learn the language, do the cones, which are I don't know if you're familiar, but they're basically unit tests that you have to fix, and so they kind of help you learn the language by fixing unit tests.
Okay.
So I did a lot of those to start off, took some classes, and just had to ramp up from scratch on that. So I think that was the most challenging part from what I remember of that role.
So you were able to learn a new language in those 3 months, or is it you learned before you started?
It was actually about a month in. So initially I came in as a, more of a front end contractor. And then, as needs changed, they were like, hey, we need you to, build some full stack features. So, we need you to ramp up on Ruby. And it was just me and the CTO at the time. So it was a very small team, and he was kind of helping me and coaching me through that process. So at least I had somebody to ask questions. And I would say that's also super important for anybody starting a new role, is find a mentor ASAP. Right. That's the person you're going to go to for your stupid questions, even though I personally don't think there's anything like a stupid question. Everything's valid. Right. And I tell all my new folks that, by the way. But yeah, I would say that was a very, powerful tool that I had in my arsenal was him, and he was super experienced. So, between his guidance on like what courses to learn, and, what parts of the code to pick up, I think that helped a lot. But Yeah, basically 4 weeks in started learning Ruby. And so that was just, it was just completely foreign. And obviously it's a coding language, but it was foreign in terms of the concepts and just the paradigms that I was used to from using JavaScript and Node.
Yeah, it's completely different, but in terms of contract, I feel like most people think of contracting like freelancing, and that's where they're kind of the sole person. I think that's a little bit scarier, especially being the sole person coming out of boot camp. But yeah, like you mentioned, mentor, that's essential because you don't know what the best practices are, and you want to build those good habits early.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's how you just learn the fastest, in my opinion. Right? Is learning from experts. And one other piece of advice around that I do it today is find the leads and the senior people in your company. Go look at their pull requests. Go look at their code. See how they write, and learn from them. Right? I think there's no substitute from just going into the editor and doing code reviews. I think that's also a kind of a hack that I did in my first year that really helped me ramp up quickly.
Yeah, no, that's true. So with this contract, like once it finished, were you like planning on getting hired by them, or did you know you would have to go back onto the job search?
Yeah, so it was. I think it was like divine intervention here, right? Where I interviewed at WorkSpan, which is my former company.
Yeah.
I actually interviewed with them right after my demo day at Hack Reactor. So I was actually lucky enough to meet them at demo day. And so I interviewed with them back in July. And so, like I said, I graduated in June, had interviewed with them in July, but they didn't have an opening at the time. But they said, hey, we really like you, but we'll be in touch if down the road if a role opens up. And so lo and behold, my contract was getting towards the end. I get an email from the CEO at WorkSpan saying, hey, are you still interested? And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, yes, this is unbelievable timing,
That's
right?
clutch.
Insane. So, the advice there is take every call, go to every interview. You never know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah,
but
and keep that relationship. Don't burn that bridge.
Network is everything. I that's getting proven more and more true throughout my career. Is the people you've worked with and the people you've interacted with are going to be around later, right? And especially in Silicon Valley, it's small, right? You bump shoulders with people you've met 4 years ago. I've run into people at coffee shops I used to go on calls with. Like it's crazy, right? But no, again, I got very lucky that the timing just happened that way. So yeah, I think my contract was ending, and then the next 10 days later, I was working at WorkSpan.
Gotcha. Okay, so WorkSpan, you come on, and now you're in an official role. So what's like the difference between being in a contract, even though you had a mentor there, and now you're in a team where I guess there's like more stability. You're going to be there for a long time.
Yeah, well, stability is a funny one because again, it was a startup, and it was Series A.
I mean, stability.
Right. It was seed Series A time, so it was like maybe 10 of us total, but
real small. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, it was. Yeah, I was one of the most junior folks on that team, right? Which again was really lucky again, where I got to learn from a lot of experienced engineers, and at a startup you're moving fast, so you get to touch a lot of things, right? So that was really nice. But yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot the question again. What was
basically just like the difference between contract versus being in official role now?
Gotcha. Yeah, I wouldn't say from a work perspective they were too different. Frankly, like it's really just, hey, here's a feature, let's build it. Right? It's really just around the processes and again, to your point, that kind of peace of mind, right? Like you have a job, you're good. You have that buffer to learn and to grow, right? It's not like your contract's on the line in the next month if things go wrong per se.
Yeah, basically you can get comfortable, learn systems, and I guess would you say you're more comfortable like going towards failure, like basically trying something new and not working out?
I think I'm very comfortable with failure. I think it's the best teacher, right? I don't think it's something to shy away from. I think one thing I would say though, and this is what I learned from sales, fail fast, right? And fail very quickly, and don't make the same mistakes twice, right? So learn from your mistakes. Everyone's gonna, we're all human. Everyone's gonna make an error. It's how do you recover from that is the question, right? And so I definitely think failing is a good thing, and it's like I said, it's the best teacher. And if you internalize it and you kind of reflect on your failures, I think it makes you better in the long run. So
1000%.
definitely not something to shy away from.
1000%. So like as you're failing fast, of course, you have to kind of move fast in a startup. There's deadlines, VC money, and all this other stuff. So what enabled you to start moving quickly in a startup?
There's no choice, frankly, right? You have to, and exactly, and everyone around you also is in that kind of same boat, right? And when you're around, I think that's also one thing I'm really kind of not loving about work from home. Also, is you especially at a startup there's an energy there, right? Everybody's coming in, everybody's that camaraderie is there. It's like you're a team, right? And especially when it's a smaller group, everybody knows each other. Like everybody knows who each other's wives and kids are. Like you get to become family with them, right? And I think that's how you kind of develop that drive and that kind of like North Star as a team, right? Everybody's in it together. We're all here to help. And I think being around really talented folks that early was just the biggest blessing, right? And it made me want to get better because I wanted to be at their level as quick as possible.
For sure. So like you were working as a regular engineer for 2 years before you became a manager, or 3 years?
Right around 3 years, yeah.
Around 3 years. So what do you think is like the biggest reason that you were tapped to be a manager that quickly?
Yeah, I have to say, I think it's a couple factors, but the big ones I would say are the ability to be proactive instead of reactive. I think that was a big factor, right? And not just waiting around for things to happen, but going and making them happen, right? And I see a lot of junior folks kind of just sitting around waiting to be told what to do, or if they get stuck, they're kind of oh, maybe I'll figure it out, or I'll kind of keep quiet. I think that is the biggest mistake you can make, right? I think when you're waiting to get told, you're kind of you're always going to be behind the curve. You want to be somebody that's going out and making things happen, or asking the right folks, or asking the right questions to get unblocked, right? So I think in my 3 years, I really proved that my manager doesn't need to tell me every little detail of what to do. They're like, hey, here's a task. I trust you to go make it happen. I think that's a big reason. I would say, the soft skills are another big one. I think that's why I'm so thankful I was in sales to begin with, where I really learned how to interact with senior leaders and executives, actually. And so I learned how to communicate with them, what kind of topics and touch points to bring up when speaking with them, how to manage upwards, right? And how to say, hey, here's the work I'm doing, here are the kind of timelines I'm delivering on, here's the risks. I think proactive communication is a huge reason, I think, that kind of helped me. And I again, something I've seen with junior developers is they kind of shy away from reaching out to their manager. They're worried that they're going to bother them, or it's annoying, or they're scared, frankly, right? But one thing I would say is your manager's there to help you at the end of the day, or that he or she will put you in touch with somebody who can unblock you, right? So don't be scared to talk to them. And I think, again, I was not scared to talk to my manager or my CEO. I said, hey, if I saw a problem, I would say, hey, here's the problem. But it's not enough to just say the problem. I would come with the solution, right? I would come up with a proposal.
Great point.
And I think that is another big reason that helped me get promoted was, I saw gaps. It's not just like, oh, by the way, that's there, but someone else will take care of it. It was like, hey, I saw this. I think this is the way to solve it. And, here's my proposal. Do you prefer A or B? As a senior leader and executive, that's exactly the kind of, proposal that they want to see, because they are busy. They don't have time to really get into the nitty gritty. But if you present them with two options and talk about the pros and cons, that makes their life easy. And, then they respect you more and give you more trust as well.
No, it's great points. Like any sort of higher up they're probably worrying about a bunch of different things. So coming to them with solutions instead of just problems, it's a huge shift. And then going to also what you said about sales. I always tell like junior engineers, I'm like, go to the sales influencers on LinkedIn and follow their tips, whether it's like cold
Yeah.
email, how to sell, like how to do pitch meetings. Because an interview is a pitch meeting. Like you need to have your story, do your research, and get the outcome that you want, which is a job. So like in your case where you have these sales skills that came in handy, which one would you say is like the most valuable in your overall career?
I mean, I touched on a couple, like being proactive, I think is a
Yeah.
huge one. And not waiting, not taking no for an answer is a big one. You know,
Okay.
I think
Expand on that.
especially in, you want to be respectful with not taking no for an answer, but you know what I mean by that is uh, don't get blocked unnecessarily, right? Just like if somebody gives you some requirement or some feature that just doesn't make sense, you know, come up with a good reason that, you know, it shouldn't be that way. And don't take it for face value, right? Come up with
Yeah.
a proposal and add value, right? I think that's adding value is another big one from sales is, you know, why is anyone going to talk to you otherwise, right? If you're not providing value to the client,
Yes.
you're not doing your job, right?
No, I love that. It's because it's true. You know, you have to like people need to know like what are they going to gain from giving you time or an opportunity, whatever it is. So you can't waste it.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, so you became a manager and then you started becoming in charge of actual hiring decisions, right?
Yes, yes. So definitely did a decent amount of hiring in my last role.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you were looking for during the interview process, and especially on on the junior side?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll talk particularly about that. So as opposed to like senior folks, but for new grads and junior hires, I would say, you know, for me personally, obviously I came from a non-traditional background. So, you know, what school you went to and like that kind of stuff wasn't really a factor. Obviously, like I want you to go to school, right? You know, you want people that have some technical expertise. But
Mhm.
more than anything, obviously, you know, everyone's going to be coachable to a degree. And so I want to find out how coachable that person is. And I think that's the biggest thing for junior folks is if you have two candidates, you know, both equal skill set and one person is, you know, really maybe really bright, don't get me wrong, they may have came from like Ivy League or top schools, but if they don't think you're going to give them the right answers, if they don't think they can learn from you, they're never going to listen and they're going to make your life difficult as a manager
Mhm.
versus somebody that's willing to listen and willing to learn and to, you know, come in with a clean slate and a fresh set of eyes. I'll take that candidate 10 times out of 10, right? Even if they have less skills, frankly, because I know that once you get the job, you're going to have to learn no matter what. You know, every company you join has a new tech stack, new way of process. Uh, there's nothing you're going to, you know, be able to do right off the bat without some level of ramping up. And so getting people that are coachable and that are humble, frankly, is my biggest thing, right? Because one thing I think people forget is you're working with people, you're working with this candidate every day, right? You're gonna have to interact with them, get on
Mhm.
calls, you know, deal with them on good days and on bad days, right? And is this somebody you want to be in the trenches with, and somebody you can trust and know that is not going to make, you know, the job more difficult, right? So I think those were the big qualities I would try to screen for because again, to me, technical ability is kind of that's the minimum bar, right? It's what can you bring on top of that is going to make you stand out.
Yeah, exactly. And like what you mentioned with, working them every day, I tell people when you're interviewing someone, they're not a robot. Like they're human. They're thinking about, hey, like how's this person going to be to work with? So it's like making that
Right.
connection. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true, and I think it kind of goes under the radar a little bit to a lot of folks, right? Where, you know, in an interview or in a screen or whatever it is, you know, put a smile on, right? Like be
Yeah.
excited. I think just show enthusiasm. I think that really goes a long way because you know it's tough on both sides, right? I mean, especially when I was doing recruiting, like you got to remember the people that are you're talking to have talked to maybe like 5 or 6 other folks. Like they might be tired too, right? And so you got to put
A lot
yourselves in
like
their
that.
shoes. and say, hey, like if it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, this guy might have or she might have had a multiple screens and had multiple interviews that day. Let me try to make them remember me, right, and not just be another candidate. I think that's something that goes a long way, especially when you're interviewing at multiple companies, right?
Yeah.
And you got to stand out.
Not for sure. And so what are some things that, the people that you did hire that they did when they started that made them stand out or succeed?
Communication. I think that's the big one for junior folks. Like I was saying earlier, I've noticed a lot of people can just kind of take a step back and maybe, be in the background and, maybe get some stuff done, but get stuck and maybe not, reach out for help, or they feel like, oh, I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm totally lost, right? I think the people that succeed don't fall into that category, right? If they get blocked, they're reaching out for help. And one rule of thumb I always tell new hires, and I do this today, if I'm blocked for more than an hour or two on a problem, I'm going to reach out, because otherwise you're just kind of getting diminishing returns, right?
Yeah.
So knowing how to unblock yourself is something a lot of new folks, or it's a really good habit that sets people apart. And knowing your own abilities, I think, is a big one. So besides that, communication is the other piece, and communicating to your manager, telling them what's going on in your day to day, right? Not waiting a whole week to talk to them, or giving them maybe more frequent updates, I think is a huge value add for newer folks, because it's helping your manager understand where you are, where you're struggling, and then they can actually help you. Versus if you're just on your own, especially in a remote world, you can't really walk up to somebody. No news is good news, or in a lot of ways, as a manager, right? So if you're not reaching out to me, I'm assuming things are good. You know what's going on. You're set.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing to, don't fall in that trap, right? If you're stuck, reach out and make sure you're communicating on a daily basis. Like even a quick sentence goes a long way. Like, hey, finish this task, moving on to this one. That's perfect, right? And it makes your manager's life easy.
Yeah, especially in a remote setting.
Yeah.
So you were a manager for 2 years, about?
A little over 2 years, yeah.
Okay. So what prompted the shift to go, from management back to now you're a senior software engineer at UserLeap?
Yeah, it's a few factors. Biggest one of all was I kind of just missed coding, to be honest with you, right? I miss my editor time. I miss getting things, built and working that I can like show my friends or say, hey, did you use that product? I built that feature, right? I was kind of missing that a little bit. And so I also did a lot more heavy front end work at WorkSpan. Not to say that I, didn't touch the back end, but I really got a lot of depth on the front end. I wanted to round out my skill set and get that same level of depth on the back end. And so, UserLeap's infrastructure and back end is exactly what I want to learn. And there's also some machine learning that's tangential here. So, it was just like checked all my boxes for the most part. So it really was just more of a, I wanted to get my technical abilities even stronger is really what it was. And it's not to say that you can't as management, but there's just no substitute for being in the editor and like running into bugs and fixing those bugs, right? That's where the experience lies. And I think one big reason I was able to do this was after talking to mentors and talking to other folks in the industry that have moved up in management or have moved up as the IC ladder. And one of my former bosses and mentors, he switched back and forth all the time, right? His career he's been director, he's been VP, he's been, lead and principal as well. And so that was a really big eye opener for me. I think engineering is unique in that sense, where other, functions, it's a little tougher to go from management and back. Engineering, it's really actually very simple from what I've gone through, and for other folks I've talked to. I felt that management's always going to be there. If I keep going down the management chain, my technical abilities are going to go less and less, and it's going to be more strategy. So I felt at this point in my career, let me double down on the tech, and then I can always go back to management later.
No, that's true. And it's a big shift. But I feel you, because managing people is completely different versus creating products. It's a completely different feeling. In management, you have to focus on how to help someone succeed. but an individual contributor role, like you said, like you're in the weeds. You found a product that you love. UserLeap is great, by the way. I just can't integrate it into my current platform, but it's
very cool.
But yeah, so I definitely get that part. And you know, so we're getting close to the end of the hour. So I always like to close up with just like a couple questions that every bootcamp grad's always wondering. So the first one is, if you're graduating from bootcamp today, what would be your plan to land a job quickly?
Yeah, I think I've done this myself, even going through this interview process recently again. Eat your vegetables. And what I mean by that is do the practice, right? And do the stuff that you don't want to do, right? Because it's going to help. And again, getting back into data structures, getting back into the core algorithms, like knowing all the sorts, knowing all the time complexities, like there's just no substitute for it, right? So I would say, as a bootcamp grad, spend all your time on those. Everything else is going to come naturally after. I think one mistake I made is I focused too much on the shiny framework and the, oh, I want to learn Angular. Oh, I want to learn React. And you got to kind of catch yourself, I would say. If I was starting from scratch, don't focus on those frameworks. Focus on understanding the language and understanding the core concepts. Everything else will come naturally after. That's one big thing. Another thing, like I was saying earlier, is know the type of role you want to do, and then tailor your experience for that. And your experience being your studying and your projects and things that you're doing to boost your resume. Again, if you're going to be back-end, work with back-end technologies. Go look at the companies you want to interview at and look at what they're using, and make sure you know those and you can talk about them in an interview, right? I think that's a big hack that people don't necessarily do. So if you've got, come up with a short list of your 15, 20, dream companies, and look at the resumes, the roles of those companies for what you want, and study those items, right? I think that's one of the best ways to avoid going in too many different directions, because it's really easy to in software, right? There's so many different things you can learn, and no one's going to be an expert in anything, or in everything, I should say. And I think that's another thing, to not feel like you have to be. I think I personally saw so many different paths, and like, oh, do I need to learn about networking? Do I need to be a database expert? Do I need to, whatever it is, pick one lane and learn it, and then move on to the next thing. You don't have to get overwhelmed with the whole big picture, because there's people that have been doing this for 20, 30 years that still learn new things, right? So I think don't be so hard on yourself is another piece of advice.
Very well said. Second question, what should every bootcamp grad be doing in the first year of their career to set themselves up for success?
Don't talk, just listen. And seriously, I can't tell you how many people come in and think that they know everything, right? And you want to take a step back, understand that you're new, understand that you're learning, and have that humbleness, and be able to listen when other folks, especially your leads and your seniors, are doing talks or presentations, and that they're again looking at their code, looking at their designs. Another big thing that I did, and I still do today, that has been really effective, is design documents. So if you're in your first year, you get a new change or a new request, you should be spending about maybe a fourth to a third of your time just understanding and researching and coming up with a plan of how you're going to handle this change. I think a lot of folks love to just jump into the code and start whittling away, but that leads you into bad directions, or you write too much code and then you hit a point where you're like, oh man, I had thought about that, I would have done this completely differently. Yeah. I think go spend more time in the design and in the inception phase of whatever work you're doing, and that'll make your life easier down the stream. So that's another big one. And again, I think just understanding every line of code is another big one that I think people kind of get too comfortable just skipping over, where it's like, oh, that's a really complex function, I can assume what it does, right? So I think not making assumptions is a big deal in your first year, because you want to make sure that you understand every line of code and you don't skip over things that are maybe a little bit foreign or are going to slow you down. It's worth it to stop, understand what's going on, and then move on.
Very, very well said. So No, I appreciate those tips. Hopefully everyone takes them to heart. So everyone, if you learned something new today, which I know I did, definitely leave a like, again, subscribe. But otherwise, Vivek, thank you so much for your time. It was really, really insightful. You shared a lot of knowledge, and of course, always go Gators. Love talking to follow along. And yeah, so any parting words or somewhere that people can kind of follow you at to learn more?
Yeah, everyone can definitely follow me on LinkedIn. And what I would say is it's a process to get this first job. And for those of you that are breaking in, it's a journey, right? It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And just put in the hours, and you'll create your own luck, I would say, right? And just stay at it. And I want to also make sure don't feel like you're alone. I got rejected by like 300 companies before I got my one yes. So it's a process. It's difficult, but it's worth it. And so just stick it out, and you'll be happy you did.
You're a beast, man. So again, thank you so much. Hope everyone has a great night, and we'll see you back here next week. Good night, everyone.
Awesome.